Season 2, Episode 1, Void Chasers of the First Descendant is nearing its end in a couple of weeks, and with someone who has way too much time invested into this game, I wanted to throw my 2 cents into the pond, because I feel in this game's early life of just 8 months, the season is potentially the most crucial and important for the team to nail down exactly what they want TFD to be. And I believe they did, albeit with a few hiccups along the way. This season, we saw massive changes to quality of life, introducing companions to the game called Fellows, which add a little extra help for gathering items on the ground, and as an added bonus perk, will auto-dismantle items based on your junk filter settings. It's a huge help to have, but it does need some fine-tuning on how fast the auto-dismantle activates. I'll still find myself jumping into the menu from time to time, deleting items faster than the perk would activate. Or the dog would get confused if there's too many items on the floor. If you had too many ETA tickets and you were capped out on it, the dog would just stand on top of it as the game would just spam inventory full over and over and over again until you eventually got rid of it. But through the course of the season, our fellows received many improvements to their functionality. At its core, it's a wonderful idea for the inventory management and adds many more options for future fellows to be implemented into the game. Maybe in the future this leads to the way for mounts to be added, but who knows. Also, can we please use the dog emotes at the end of missions, by the way? I just want to give my little guy a high five. And I almost forgot about the reactor changes they made. No longer are we stuck with the specific weapon mounting on reactors. Now it's changed to the general weapon class itself, which you can add up to 2 extra mounting options for the other classes, with the ability to change the original mounting coming later down the road. You can boost your reactor to level 5 now if you want that extra power boost, and the match shouldn't be too hard to come by now to get those additional levels. The substats and the way you go about farming reactors still needs some work. That's a part of the game I actively avoid for the reason it's just too boring to do. But I'd love a feature of upgrading the substats sometime in the future. But I know the way this game works, that will come with a steep price and an extra material to grind for, so careful what I wish for. I guess.
Not bad. Nice hot mustard. Good bread. Turkey's a little dry. The turkey's a little dry. Oh, foul accursed thing! What demon from the depths of hell created thee?
Another addition to quality of life that was added completely changed the way you go about farming for Amorphous materials. No longer will you have to use Sharon with her camo and camp outside an outpost and do the same repetitive actions until your brain turns to ash. Instead now, you can farm for those materials through basic operations. And to add on top of that, you don't have to run the same missions over and over again. You can flex between the other operations, excluding the ones that are 400% for the day, and still get the items from the initial operation. But what I want to know is what's it going to take to get 400% on all infiltration ops, but in reality, it may not be the quickest way to obtain those items depending on how fast the op can be completed, but at least it's a nice option to switch things up. They've gone a step further and added components to the operation missions now, so you're not forced to blow through Pyromancer for the millionth time. It's amazing to see the flow and how we go about getting our gear change, and it was a much needed change. Now we get into the juicy bits. So sticking with missions, we got 3 new mission types this season, starting with the Void Abyss Intercept bosses, a more stronger, beefed up version of previous Colossus we've encountered, with this season seeing variants to the Crab Walker and Gluttony. Even though they are variants of previous bosses, there's a few changes in mechanics. The game calls this Rage Mode, so instead of the boss going invincible as they normally would, now they just want to kill you harder. For example, we'll take Big Tony's evil twin, the Devourer, or just Barney. But when Barney enters its Rage Mode, it becomes way more aggressive and way more faster, doing this massive rampage attack that follows you around the arena. There's also a poison debuff that can be inflicted upon you. But if you manage to break the canisters on the field, it can cleanse you of this poison. These bosses provided a great challenge, but of course we're in the age of information, and within 48 hours, strategies and speedruns are already developed, and both bosses were solved pretty quickly. At least you can get some cool backpacks and skins for your completions, but the grind itself will get tiresome after your 500th clear, and the needed material to craft weapon cores are directly tied to the Abyss bosses. So you're in it for the long haul, but not to worry, if you don't want to do that for too long, you can also go to the 400% and grind for them there. The Abyss bosses are a cool idea and add a lot of extra layers to the challenge and difficulty in co-op play. In the future, I like to see them take this chance to introduce new bosses of different sizes and in different environments. We're seeing the overarching narrative get fleshed out a little more with the introduction of Abyss bosses, as it directly tied into Void Vessels, which are the new instant-based dungeons. In an attempt to add a variant each time you load in, it would be different than the last run you went on, with new hidden corridors and secret rooms to find loot stashes with crafting items for the dog or new descendants. Along the way, you can find beacons you can interact with, and those beacons will give you bonus time when you reach the final boss. But there's only really 3 variants in the levels that I found, and that initial sense of discovery will only last so long, so that idea can be expanded upon greatly. There's a lot you can do with a mission type like this. It's a cool way to introduce Keelan, Nez, and the doggo into the story of TFD, sending these elite hound operatives to this lost ship or ark, if you will, that the ancestors used to further their own initiatives into the immortality and the beyond. I know we all blast through these now, but I have to give credit to their art direction. TFD has beautiful and interesting environments, and they continue that inside the vessel as they take on this eerie vibe and foreboding nature with really cool areas. We finally got to learn more about what happened to Aisha and her team, giving Ajax some closure for his pain, learning more about the ancestors like I mentioned before. Initially, I wasn't a fan of the vessels for the reason I was expecting a little bit more with the variants in the gameplay and the level design, but knowing where they can make improvements to the level design, variants in enemies and bosses, almost like a roguelite in a way, it's exciting to see how this mode will evolve down the road if they intend to keep it. A little side note, I'm a lore nerd and I really appreciate the efforts they went into this season with giving the characters and settings we're in a little bit more meaning. They did a great job with Sharon's story, her struggle with balancing her humanity and individuality within the Coleman forces and becoming that perfect weapon was really cool to see. So the sky's the limit for the rest of the cast, and TFD is at its strongest when it leans into that existential and the mystery of its world, so with Glay's story coming, we may get more of that. But I know, you're not playing TFD for lore, you're a prime gamer, a top tier gamer, you need a mode that will test you to your absolute limits. And if that sounds perfect for you, then Void Erosion is tailor-made. God, this mode is something else, but Void Erosion is TFD's new wave-based time attack mode, which has run into a little bit of controversy this episode. The mode itself is pretty simple. Survive the hordes of Vulgus from the respected factions, beat the level within the time limit, and you can move on to the next. Each wave or level steadily increasing in difficulty as you move along. You can do this solo or opt in for co-op play. It's pretty standard stuff, right? The idea for this mode was to place a heavier emphasis on the gunplay of TFD, an aspect of the game that was falling by the wayside due to the staggering abilities that the Descendants have. The solution? The weapon core system was born, an additional gamble roll on top of the weapon readjustment system. With the weapon cores, they would provide bonus stats to your weapon's damage, elemental damage, or fire rate, just to name it. These stats are tied to the respective color tier of cores, ranging from 1 to 10. But no, seriously, it's totally materia. I can't be the only one that's seeing that, right?
Forces operative for the new Wutai government. I have orders to infiltrate Shinra HQ and steal their ultimate materia, to prove to our common enemy that Wutai is not to be trifled with. Members of Avalanche, with your full support, we got this.
Ready to rumble, huh?
You better believe it.
Moving on, the gameplay loop is clear. Finish the waves, collect your cores, and hit the slots for higher percentages on your preferred stats, and repeat. And for the first 20 waves, the community was breezing through these levels, the confidence was really high, and the devs responded in kind. You see, up to wave 20, players were still opting to use their skills, so when wave 21 to 30 dropped, so did our skill damage. It dropped off a cliff. And this is where the controversy began, because it seems like most of the community just wasn't ready for such a drastic change in the paradigm to tackle these new waves. What was once a skill duel turned into a gunfight, and I was cool with that, a nice change of pace to switch things up, but the extreme they went to was a little crazy, and I respect them for taking the time to make content more challenging and more difficult this season. I'm all for tougher enemies and bosses, but the bullet sponges were a bit much. Running through these waves, I found myself being time-gated more than I was dying. And as you're just trying to figure out how to get through and just to learn and get better, that gets a little frustrating. It became less about mechanical skill as a player and more about the stats that were tied to my gun. But in true community fashion, within a couple days, strats were being developed and progress was being made. and players eventually got to wave 30. A patch later came out to reduce the difficulty and open up public co-op fully for the higher stages. Look, I actually like Erosions, and even with the crazy bullet sponges and absurdly tanky bosses, I like what they presented here. I love that they added leaderboards, giving players new avenues to challenge themselves against one another. It seems like people really responded well to that. But most of my cons this episode stem from Erosion. I understand why they made that choice initially to make the waves tougher than the previous ones. You want people to use their guns and interact with the weapon core system, and through trial by fire, they got their point across. It forced me to stop half-assing my guns and to finally invest into them. It's even taken some guns that were thought to be not worth using now suddenly get a second wind thanks to the weapon cores. It's amazing seeing the build diversity really come into its own this episode, and I envision a future for the game where we can strike a harmony between guns and skills. Keelan is a great example of this, and maybe Serena might fit into that role as well. I just don't like the over-reliance on the gambling aspect. Eventually you will get that 1% roll, depending on your luck of course, but continuously rolling for that 1% max roll gets tiring after a while.
This is Atlantic City all over again.
You've got 20.
Hit me.
Peter, don't.
Hit me.
21.
Hit me.
Peter.
Hit me.
That's 30.
Hit me.
Will it make a huge difference? Probably not, depending on what you're building for. And that's not mentioning the thought of having copies of the same weapon re-cored but just built for either Colossus or a particular faction or elemental weakness. But if you're playing daily and need something to do, then I guess it's not an issue, but that's still pretty crazy to me. The repetition doesn't really provide any unique change. You did it once, you'll get ready to do it again 500 times more, almost the exact same way each time. I hope what I'm saying here doesn't really come across as bitching or complaining. I just wish there was more ways of fighting the bosses, for example, instead of pumping it full of bullets till it drops. I wouldn't mind then hitting the slots every couple of runs, but as it stands now, the gameplay loop for Erosions is kind of dull, but there's a wide window of improvements to turn that around. Overall, this season, or episode if we're going by that now, I believe was a huge success. A lot of important and much needed changes to the way you farm and interact with the game, new modes that help with the game's monotonous nature. The devs at Nexon work incredibly hard, almost around the clock it seems. Like every day there's a new patch with fixes, balance changes, community events that help with players catch up and stock up on items, having ETA open up on the weekends to give you extra storage slots, paints, implementing daily challenges to get a few million gold each day. All the work they've done to be so open with the community and address their concerns is amazing to see, and honestly that is so hard to ask for now in the current landscape of the industry. So the foundation is laid for the future. Serena is on her way, skill trees, alt Blair, new story content for Glay, and so much more. Episode 2 is really shaping up to be an amazing continuation. If you made it this far, thank you so much for allowing me 13 minutes of your time to ramble into your ear about this season. I greatly appreciate you tuning in, so I hope you stick around for more videos in the future. But until then, I'll see you around. Take care.